今天讲我们这个
Good, so we will continue with the uncommon feature of Ngakyo Nyingma. Ngakyo means the earlier translation. Yesterday we talked about Jingme Rinpoche. I think I made some mistake. I did not. I misunderstood that Jingme Rinpoche from Atiling did not go. And this Jingme Rinpoche is Jingme Khenpo Rinpoche. It was someone different, not the same Jingme Rinpoche from Atiling. It's the Jingme Khenpo Rinpoche from his center rather than from Atiling. Probably another reincarnation of Khenpo Rinpoche. And previously we also spoke about Dilgo Khenpo Rinpoche. Dilgo Khenpo Rinpoche, according to some information, some record, that Dilgo Khenpo Rinpoche also went to Boulder because at the time of the parinirvana of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, Dilgo Khenpo Rinpoche also went there to practice all the rituals back then. Back then, 16th Karmapa, Trungpa Rinpoche and Dilgo Khenpo Rinpoche. So it is said in the record that at the time of parinirvana of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, Dilgo Khenpo Rinpoche also went there. So we'll continue with the teaching given at Zika Kongtrul Rinpoche's center, and Zika Kongtrul Rinpoche's photo is included in the later part of the book. He is rather tall, and he was making the katak offering to Pontsuk Rinpoche in that book. He is a toku. Now let's look at the uncommon feature of Ngakyo Nyingma. Thinking about flourishing all the 8 lineages of attainment in Tibet, such as Kadampa, as well as the 8 qualities of every lineage masters. Well, previously he talked about the history of Nyingma lineage, and this part Pontsuk Rinpoche is going to talk about how great the Nyingma lineage is. And then he said that it is true that all of them are of actual reincarnations of Lord Rinpoche Padmasambhava. The 8 lineages, such as the Nyingma, Gagyu, Sakya, Jonam, Shamba, Kagyu, Gelug, Orjin, and probably Cho, and so on. He then talked about, in fact, all of those great lineage masters are the true reincarnations of Orjin Rinpoche Padmasambhava. For example, in both Sakya Pandita's biography and the prophecy of Guru Rinpoche himself, it mentioned that Sakya Pandita was the emanation of Padmasambhava. There was a terma that specifically spoke about that. There's the record of the name of the father and mother and so on. And then in the school of Kagyu, the youth Chandraprabha said in his biography that the peerless Gampopa was an emanation of Padmasambhava. Now, Chandraprabha was a bodhisattva who requested on the Samadhi Sutra in front of Shakyamuni Buddha, and then the Buddha prophesied that you will become a Gampopa. That is why Gampopa, for many lifetimes in his previous life, his name was Chandraprabha. And then in the school of Kadam, there is the same statement in both the Venerable Atisha and the great Tsongkhapa was the emanation of Padmasambhava. As for the school of Junang, some biography writings claimed that the two well-known great lineage masters, the Dopopa and Taranatha, were indeed manifestations of the Padmasambhava. So, in the various kinds of records, for example, in Gelupa, the fourth Panchen Lama, there is the record saying that how Padmasambhava turned into or manifested into Atisha and then into Tsongkhapa. This is not proclaimed by Nyingma, rather this is a statement from Gelupa themselves. And then from Junang, the Junang school's two lineage masters, Dopopa and Taranatha, that we studied from, if you remember the author of the Sutra Shastra, they were also the manifestations of the Padmasambhava. In the father teaching of the Kadam school, Venerable Atisha said, in Tibet, all great lineage holders who spread the Buddha Dharma in the beginning ensure its flourishing in the middle as well as long-term prosperity in the end are without exception manifestations of Origin Rinpoche Padmasambhava. Even Guru Rinpoche himself said that as long as you show devotion to me, the Buddha Dharma will remain in the world. If you ever start to lose faith in me and nobody remembers to supplicate me, the Dharma will quickly disappear from this world. Well, even nowadays, whenever we encounter different kinds of obstacles and so on, we would still supplicate to Padmasambhava. Sometimes we practice the wrathful manifestation, sometimes the peaceful. All of these are really essential. If we were to practice a little bit every year, it's going to unfetter us from all kinds of obstacles and bring peace to this world. That is why it's really essential to supplicate to Padmasambhava. And then from the perspective of ultimate truth, all great lineage holders and patriarchs were born in Tibet shared the same mind stream. From the perspective of the phenomenal level, however, no such masters are as great as Origin Guru Rinpoche. The great Khenpo Bodhisattva, Vimalamitra, had never been born in Tibet, the land of snows. In fact, all three of them are not Tibetans. Not only these inconceivable great Panditas, no Lotsawas equal to those at the time of Padmasambhava have ever appeared in the later times. Well, all of these are included in the historical records, such as the Red Book of the History, and then Buddhan history of Buddhism, and the Samba history of Buddhism. The other day, when I quoted from those historical records about Padmasambhava, in fact, they were not included in the Blue Annal and the White Annal. And then Phuntsho Rinpoche continued to say that during the time of Lodrok Marpa Lotsawa, the matchless one among all translators who was responsible for the later translations was Ngok Loden Shirab. This is also included in the Tibetan history of Buddhism. While attempting to translate Maitreya's ornament of the Mahayana Sutras from Sanskrit into Tibetan, he noticed that there were many Araka in the seventh chapter on the 6 paramitas. This term Araka literally means no attachment in Sanskrit. Loden Shirab had no way to distinguish all the repetitions of this Sanskrit term Araka by just translating every one of them as non-attachment. He actually had no idea what this particular term is referring to, and then feeling frustrated, he did some research on the Nyingma's translation of Buddhist texts. Amazingly, he found that the great translator in earlier times understood the proper use of the same term, Araka, based on the sound of the syllables. Every usage of the term Araka then had a specific meaning in regard to the 6 paramitas of generosity, discipline, patience, diligence, meditative concentration, and wisdom. Moreover, in terms of every paramita, for example, the generosity, there were 3 Arakas referring to the generosity of past, present, and future, respectively. He read a line of of a translation which then said, I think this part is included in the second edition, said that not going to be attached, not attached, and never having been attached. The nature of attachment is non-attachment. As he noted, such a beautiful paraphrases that took the factor of context into full consideration, his arrogance was completely shattered, and he composed a verse to express his admiration. Vairocana was like the boundless sky itself. Kawa and Chuk was like the sun and the moon. Rinchen Zampo was like the great dawn star. Compared to them, we're like mere fireflies. Gawa means Gawa Beiza. We usually read his translation and Zhuo Li Jiangzhen. They were just like the sun and moon. And then the great Lotsawa Rinchen Zampo was like the great dawn star. And compared to all of these great Lotsawas, the later translation Lotsawas are just like mere fireflies. So he had that kind of admiration towards the Nyingma translators. Pongzu Rinpoche at the time just kept on going with all of those quotations and the stories and so on. To all of us, we feel very much in awe and feeling quite proud that this is the earlier translation. This story indicates the extraordinary features of those great translators who did the earlier translation in the time of Padmasambhava. This part talks about the translators. And then we'll look at the Panditas of the earlier translation schools. The earlier Panditas came to propagate teachings, and the later Panditas probably there to gain wealth, just like how the Tibetans, when they go to mainland China, their intention is to gain wealth and fame and so on, houses and cars and those of those. Speaking of the great Panditas, Origin Rinpoche, Padmasambhava, and Vimalamitra have already gone beyond the aging process of the physical body. Now Padmasambhava now lives in Ngayabling, the southwest subcontinent of Jambudvipa, which is inhabited by Rakshasas, and over there he turns the wheel of Dharma to guide beings. And Vimalamitra now lives in Mount Wutai in the Han region and teaches the Dharma there. He teaches some of the old monks over there. Some of the Mongolians, for some reason, they have a certain adversity towards the Padmasambhava, and the statues of Padmasambhava are not allowed to be placed at Mount Wutai, and I'm not very pleased about it at all. I think this should be told to Vimalamitra. All Dharma practitioners who follow Padmasambhava, Vimalamitra, and the great Khenpo Bodhisattva are called Nyingma followers, and they are able to learn and practice the complete and intact Sutra and Tantras. This is the uncommon feature of Nyingma. Some may wonder, well, the new school also provides complete Sutras and Tantras. Why would you say that this is the uncommon feature of the old school? How would you say that this is only unique to the old school then? Indeed, Pongzu Rinpoche continued to explain, over 300 volumes of Kangyur and Tengyur existing in today's Tibet were mainly translated in the period of earlier translation. Yeah, there are just a few scriptures that were translated independently by translators of the new schools, but the majority of them were translated by the old school translators. Well, in the translations that's available nowadays in the Becha forms, there's usually an explanation of who the translator was. So, for example, we know who the Madhyamkavatara was translated by so-and-so and so on. There are only a few that's translated after the destruction of Dharma, of Buddha Dharma, of Long Dharma. But the majority of the teachings were, the Sutras and Tantras were translated by Vairocana, by Yishide and Gaura-Beza and so on. Therefore, anyone who practices sutras and tantras in general, and the three inner classes of tantra in particular, are more specifically the Dzogchen Ati Yoga. The three yogas, Dzogchen, Ati Yoga, those teachings belong to the old school of Nyingma. This is the indispensable criteria for determining whether a practitioner belongs to Nyingma or not. Does your center practice the Nyingma tradition? And Phuntsok Rinpoche started asking, are you a Nyingma center? You're a Nyingma, right? Phuntsok Rinpoche asked, and some then answered, yes, Nyingma, but also Kagyu. And then Phuntsok Rinpoche right away started to talking about the qualities of both Nyingma and Kagyu. If yes, please remember this point. He said, remember what I've said. This is the most fundamental point that I would like to repeat again. It is Nyingma more than any other school that possess the complete and intact teaching of Sutrayana and Tantrayana. This is the uncommon and unique feature of the Nyingma school. Other schools, such as Sakya and Kagyu, only possess Anu-yoga Tantra that includes the Mother Tantra, Father Tantras, and non-dual Tantras. However, the three inner classes of Tantra, in terms of Mahayoga, Anu-yoga, and Ati Yoga, are exclusive and specific to Nyingma school. Though that to other schools, there's the Kala Chakra and there's the teachings of Chakra-sambhava and so on, but they do not have the Dzogchen Ati Yoga. This might be a little bit longer than usual. And then he continued to say that the Dzogchen Ati Yoga teachings that enables practitioner to achieve Buddhahood in the swiftest way is only accessible in this Nyingma school. At the beginning, it was these two great masters, Padmasambhava and Vimalamitra, who introduced and spreaded Dzogchen teachings in Tibet and established the Nyingma school. In the middle period, it was the omniscient Longchenpa and the great Pandita Rontsompa who carried forward the teachings and propagated it in the land of snows. In the later period, it was omniscient Mipa Rinpoche and Jangyan Khyentse Wangpo who made the Nyingma teachings flourish once again in Tibet. Well, this kind of concise summarization has never heard before. This is really well said. You need to remember it. These are the three periods of Dzogchen teachings, namely the period of the earlier propagation, the middle propagation, later propagation. The period of earlier propagation, the Dzogchen teaching taught by Padmasambhava was regarded as the new Dzogchen or the Terma Dzogchen, and the teachings given by Vimalamitra was commonly known as the old Dzogchen or the Kama Dzogchen. Thus, there are two types of the Nyingtik: the old Vima Nyingtik or Vimalamitra, and the new Khandro Nyingtik of Padmasambhava. In the period of the middle propagation, omniscient Longchenpa provided extensively the teachings on the mind's nature of luminosity based mainly on the 17 tantras that belong to the category of the pith instructions. And then the great Pandita Rontsompa elaborated on the view of the mind's essence of emptiness by following the 21 mother and child tantras that belong to the outer category of mind, as well as the tantra of inner category of space that are classified into the three sections of white, black, and variegated space. Well, we are studying from the omniscient Dzogchenpa. We learned the text, but the text of Rontsompa, because of the history, we don't have too many of his texts available. But recently, we had already studied the Vajrayana text of Entering the Way of Mahayana by Rontsompa. So we would be able to complete all the three different aspects. And in the period of later propagation, Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo transmitted profound instructions to fortunate beings, guiding them onto the path of Dzogchen. In the Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo's biography, we can see that he was a great master, the Lama of Jumipang Rinpoche. And the text that we recently studied, the teaching on the syllable A, was composed by Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo. We didn't really study too many texts that's composed by Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo. Once in his samadhi, he's foreseen, he saw all of the termas that's hidden by Padmasambhava, as well as the turtles who will reveal them, and so on. So he is considered as the king of all termas. As well as him had compiled the treasury of all termas. Both of them are the Jumipang Rinpoche's lamas. They expounded on the vast doctrines on the Buddhist philosophy, subduing those harboring wrong views in Buddhism and the Nyingma tradition in particular. If you want to study Dzogchen teachings that is only specific to Nyingma tradition, you must follow the teachings of these 6 great masters.